evening and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Rocket League EU Power Ranking Show for the week of December 21st, 2015. My name is Shalthis. This is that time of week again where we bring you the top 10 from the world of Rocket League, specifically in the European region. So, yeah, they have impeccable timing. I guess they didn't like that I started the episode or something, but either way, here we are. We're ready to get going. So we've got the news going down at the bottom of the screen. Quick update before we get started on a couple of things. First thing is there will not be a power ranking show, nor will there be power rankings next week. For obvious reasons, this week is going to be extremely slow. So we expect that very few teams will be participating. I don't even think Gfinity is running. So all that's going to leave is ESL, really. Maybe some IRCL games, if they exist. But with that being said, performances that take place this week will be rolled into our ranking consideration for the week after. So everything will factor in, even if somebody does decide to play in ESL or whatever, it'll all count towards the same end goal. But there will not be a power ranking next week for that reason. With that being said, that does mean that the debut of the NA power ranking show will take place when we do those rankings. So for anybody who may have missed it, starting January 1st, which is the brand new day of the first new year, I don't even know what I was saying there. The first day of the new year, I'll be starting the NA power ranking show, and that will take place Friday night. So don't miss that. It's going to be a good time for NA folks to all be a part of it. I want to say I said it was going to start at 8 Eastern. I may have said 7 Eastern. I still have to figure that part out. But the idea is that we will do the same thing we're doing here, but for, of course, the North American power ranking. So that will start January 1st, 2016. So don't miss that. So we'll get down to the other fun stuff that we usually do, but first, let's go ahead and kick off our top 10 here, shall we? And that's kind of what we're here for, right? So let's do it. Top 10 teams this week. There's been a lot of movement, but for the last few weeks, it's kind of been quiet, mainly because there's not been a great deal of direct play between a lot of these teams. We've had Gfinity and ESL, but with the start of the RLC Pro League, that's kind of helped give us a little bit of direct play between a lot of the teams on this list. We know who's going into the Pro League now. We know the teams that have qualified. So now, it's really just a matter of seeing how this all plays out once the Pro League season starts, which will be in a couple of weeks. But all things considered, I think we're ready to get things going. So let's get started with our number 10 team on this list, Comrade Gaming. So Comrade Gaming will go down a couple of spots here. They had a pretty good introduction to the list last week with their big win at the open bracket. They actually did fairly well for all of the open participating teams who got in. And yeah, all in all, I mean, their performance was pretty good. They had wins over teams really that they should have beaten, so there was no real surprise there. But no major wins to help kind of bump them up, and a lot of good performance from the other teams to get them up the list as well. So a good start for Comrade Gaming, and again, Comrade consists of Blackies, OSP, Musketeers, and Jukesy, who are on this list. OSP being one smelly poop. So that is your team. So unfortunately, they didn't make it into the RLC Pro League, but they still had some pretty decent performance, and that's going to keep them in the top 10 at least for now. We're starting to see with this a bit of distinction being made between the teams that are on this list and the ones that aren't. And that's starting to separate a little bit. It's not quite as close and chaotic as it used to be. I expect, though, after the start of Pro League, when the competition for most of these teams is going to take place in Gfinity, in ESL, that'll be the point where it gets tight again. But for now, there's starting to be there's beginning to be a little bit of separation. So it's a good showing for Comrade Gaming. But Unfortunately, it does knock them down a couple spots. Again, like I said, there's a lot of movement on these power rankings this week for a lot of these teams. So with that said, let's move on to number 9, Team Rocket. So Team Rocket doesn't move anywhere after last week's performance. As far as how they win, they do fairly well in the RPL qualifier tournament this past weekend. They got some decent wins. They made it maybe a little further than some of us expected. They actually ended up beating Comrade Gaming and getting wins over Galactic Lions, who would win ESL this past week. So, an overall decent performance. However, they still need to get some big wins. Had they placed a little further, had they picked up some wins over bigger teams, they may have gotten a little bit better here. And I will say that holding on to this number 9 spot really is justified because of who they've beaten, and because the separation at the bottom of the power ranking list is getting so much clearer and so much bigger. So, you know, a pretty fair excuse to keep them at number 9, I would say. But good overall performance by Team Rocket earns them this spot. And we'll see if they'll be able to climb the rankings at all over the next couple weeks. We know that they also did not qualify for the Rocket League Central Pro League, so their future kind of depends on how they play in Gfinity and how they play in ESL and whatever else happens to occur. But with all that being said, Team Rocket holding down the fort there at number 9. So, with that being said, let's move on to number 8, Gold Rush. So again, the team comprised mostly of members of the former Smokin' Rockets. Goes down a couple spots this week. A lot of it has to do with how they fared during the RPL qualifiers. With that being said, as far as their wins go, they would end up beating In Extremis Rocket League, which is expected, you know. And they would end up also getting wins over Team Solid and Team Rocket. So those victories there are basically to be expected. You know, all in all, we kind of expected them to end up winning and getting those wins there. Their losses would come mostly to Spectral, who would end up sending them to the lower bracket and being the team who would eliminate them from the RPL qualifier. So, they also had a 7th place consolation sort of match, which would get them that 7th spot in Pro League, which they ended up playing against Noble Esports, and again, they would lose that. So, again, they drop a few spots mainly because their wins were against teams that they should have won against, and their losses came against teams that they would have really needed to beat to keep high up in the rankings. There's been, like I said, a lot of movement this week. So, Gold Rush taking that number 8 spot, going down a couple of places here, just like many teams this week. There's, like I said, a lot of movement going on here. Number 7, Noble Esports. Noble will also drop a couple of spots here, and that really just has to do with their overall performance as of late. So, they came very close to not making it into the RPL this week. A lot of that had to do with 2 big losses to Supersonic Avengers during the qualifier, but they did manage to eke out that win against Gold Rush to get them into that 7th spot. Which is the same kind of 7th spot that Nexus Untethered managed to qualify for on the NA side. So, overall, you know, if we look at their wins, what they got here, they got a couple of wins over Gold Rush, which gets them above them in these rankings here. They've also got a win over Comrade Gaming, as they should. They've beaten Shift Play and Orcs RL. All of those teams are teams that Noble definitely needs to beat. Had they lost any of those games, they could have fallen a little bit further in these rankings, but it really had to do with the fact that, see, them dropping 2 spots isn't necessarily due to the fact that they are inherently worse, but a lot of these other teams that you're going to see above them just did better, and they got bigger wins and better overall performance, so thus why they are where they are. But all in all, they have qualified for the Pro League. They made it in, so we're going to really see over these next many weeks, once the Pro League kicks off, how Noble fares. Can they use this time to kind of rebuild their roster in the sense of getting a little more competitive, getting back to the level that they were at. You know, I mentioned not too long ago that I thought Noble was going to be that team to start encroaching on that #1 spot and really fight for it alongside SK and Flipside. But as it has been lately, Noble has started to just kind of fall off the radar. So hopefully they get it together, figure out what their problems are, and come back fighting. They're going to have a lot of weeks of Pro League in which to do that. So we'll see how that pans out starting in a couple weeks' time. So with that being said, let's move on to number 6, Spectral, who gets a huge jump based off of their performance at the RPL qualifiers. Spectral goes up 4 spots since last week. So they were on the cusp of completely falling off of this list when during last week's tournament they really come back, and I mean, they get some wins that they should have gotten. In Extremis RL and Orcs were 2 wins that I expected Spectral to have. But they also got 2 wins over Gold Rush, which is a big deal. So those are teams that are a little closer together on these rankings. That bumped them up higher. But not only that, the upset of the week, as you may have seen scrolling on the bottom of the screen, maybe not yet, but Spectral ended up taking a series 3-2 over SK Gaming during Gfinity this past Friday. So based off of that win, based off their performance during the RPL qualifiers and all of that combined, Spectral more than earns this spot, edging out Noble and Gold Rush into the number 6 place. So, you know, not much else to say about that. You know, other than the fact that they definitely fought hard to earn their place in the RPL. And I'm eager to see how they keep this going, because they were on the cusp. They had a really rough few weeks that were dropping them further and further down the rankings. I mean, this is a team that was number 4 for a time. And the fact that they lost that a little bit is kind of a big problem. But it appears they're getting back in the groove of things. So we'll see how Spectral does going into the RPL. Alright, so with that being said, number 5, Supersonic Avengers. Supersonic Avengers is going to jump 2 spots after an utterly outstanding performance this past week. Going into the RLC Pro League qualifier tournament, they would end up getting wins over Galactic Lions, 3 Musketeers, and Noble Esports. The only loss they'd have would be to MyXMG, which would send them into that lower bracket. But for there, they would end up still qualifying for the RPL, and would really just have a solid run overall. They also end up getting wins over Spectral and Comrade Gaming and Gfinity, and would make it to the finals, but just narrowly lose to Flipside Tactics. So, all in all, a very good showing for Supersonic Avengers this week. They are doing what we expected them to do. You know, as far as Supersonic Avengers goes, I really expected them to start climbing these rankings. And the loss to MyXMG wasn't necessarily expected, so to say, but it did help figure out how much work Supersonic Avengers has to do to keep making it up these rankings. So they do have some work left. They've got some stuff left to do on their plate, but hopefully they can pull it together and actually make it further up here. But with that being said, number 4, Crown and Jewels, who are going to drop 1 spot this week. So Crown and Jewels does drop a spot, but it's not because there's a huge gap between 3 and 4, because there really isn't. Their performance this past week went pretty well. They ended up taking a loss to MyXMG during Gfinity, but they would get some wins against Team Rocket and Spectral in order to qualify for the RLC Pro League. So really, all in all, what it says here is that they got enough wins to justify them being in that number 4 spot. But the number 3 team and higher are teams that they need to beat to get back in those places. They could do it against number 3. I don't know how well they'd be able to do it against 2 and 1, but you know, we'll really have to see as far as Crown and Jewels go. But again, a fair showing during the RPL qualifier, so we're going to see how that fares. Moving on to number 3, My XMG. No real surprise there. They hadn't been on the list yet, and we talked about how they had beaten Crown and Jewels and also had a pretty decent run in the qualifier. So that ended up earning them a spot in RPL. And the only real major loss they had this week was a 2-3 to Flipside Tactics, which, again, kind of expected when the rankings are the way they are. So, lost there, but they would get wins over Three Musketeers, and they would get wins over Supersonic Avengers to put them into the tournament, and again, that win they had over Crown and Jewels. So, overall, very nice week for my XMG. Bumps them up a spot, gets them back into that top 3, and it could be enough to start making moves into that top 2. But it's very hard to break that top 2. That is certainly the thing that is holding back a lot of teams right now, is trying to get past those 1 and 2 spots. But for my XMG, they're on a good roll as far as finding their footing again, making an effort into getting into, they got into the Pro League very well. Now they just got to keep that up, and we'll see how they do from week to week. But with that, let's move on. Number 2 this week, probably no surprise, SK Gaming. No movement here, but SK Gaming, the only thing they did this week was participate in Gfinity, since they are already in the Pro League. They didn't have to qualify, and it would be a really surprising loss for them to take against Spectral. So, not a lot of performance out of them, but with that being said, it was a 1 week, 1 match situation, so no real excuse to move them very much. Until they get either more losses like that, or some serious wins, whichever happens first, they're probably going to hold on to number 2 for a little bit longer. But the thing that really will make it interesting is because these teams are all playing in Pro League in the top 7 here, then we'll have more direct competition between them. Actual wins and losses between these teams that we can build from. And of course, it all depends on if they play in the Pro League, or not Pro League, but Gfinity, if they manage to do ESL, all depending on scheduling of stuff, of course, which I don't entirely know yet. But all in all, SK Gaming holding on to number 2, and I guess deservedly so. So the obvious number 1, Flipside Tactics. For the 2nd week in a row, coming back after being bumped down a spot 2 weeks back to SK Gaming, they have solidified their position. They won the Gfinity tournament this past week by defeating Supersonic Avengers, and that's really about it. That's all they did, and that's really all they have to do to hold on to this spot. So it proved that they're still one of the more dominant teams in Europe. They're still able to beat their competition, and how Pro League goes is going to tell us a lot about how they're going to fare the rest of the way. But like I said, no real shock there that Flipside Tactics is your number 1 team. So there you go. There are your top 10 teams for this week. Now, once again, to reiterate the 2 announcements I made earlier. Number 1, there will not be a power ranking or a power ranking show next week. We're taking the week off due to the holiday season, due to the lack of teams that are going to play, and we'll come back the week after. The other side of that announcement is that starting January 1st, the NA Power Ranking Show will begin. So if you're interested in seeing the NA rankings in this same kind of lovely presentation format, less Santa hat though, because Christmas will be over, that will take place starting on the 1st of the year. So don't miss that. But with that being said, there's your top 10. Everything's done. Now, talk to me, chat. Do you have any questions, concerns, comments? What do you think of this week's power rankings? Let's talk about them, because now it's that time. Pro League season will begin not this upcoming Sunday, but the next Sunday after that. So again, Pro League takes a week off because of the holiday season. They'll be back next week. Same with the power rankings. So it just made sense for us to skip that. So the RLC Pro League begins, not this weekend, but next. The actual schedule should be released hopefully soon in terms of what times everything will be taking place, but of course, it will all air on twitch.tv/Rocket League Central. So make sure you're tuning in for that. Okay, no, I don't think Cosmic has lost their magic. I'm getting this question a lot. No, they have not lost their magic. Cosmic is going to be just fine. Once they get things back in order and they're back doing the Pro League on a regular basis, I think Cosmic will be fine. Their magic is intact. They're like Houdini. They're going to drown in a bucket of chains. Anyway. Do you think we'll ever see F3 fall from the top? Yeah. They have, actually. They were number 2 weeks back. So, can they? Absolutely. They're one of those teams that has been very dominant in the European scene. So, it's hard to tell when and if they're going to fall out of favor, basically. But I think they certainly can and could. But as it stands right now, they're just in a really good spot. And I don't see them making much movement unless some team starts to really encroach on their turf. Alright, how long do you think until SA is in second place? I don't know. They're going to need some big wins. You know? I think in a couple weeks' time, I could see them possibly in number 3, depending on who they beat. But that's all it really comes down to, is who do they get the big wins against, how do they fare, how do other teams do, because if other teams do poorly, that can artificially bump them up the list due to a lot of factors. So I could see them getting up a little bit further. But as it stands right now, I'm not really sure, because I don't know how quickly they're going to be able to get those wins that they need. Where's Rocket Royale? That is currently on a hiatus. Hopefully we'll be back in the near future. I have no real news about Rocket Royale, though. At least not at the moment. And yeah, it is too bad that Team Rocket didn't manage to qualify. They tried really hard, but, you know, it's the best of the best. That's why we had a double elimination bracket for the qualifiers. There will not be a way for teams that have not qualified for Pro League to get into the Pro League in the middle of the season. However, the process you've seen that has taken place over the last few weeks will take place before the start of any season of Pro League. So if a team does exceptionally well over the course of this week, and starts picking up some really serious wins and says, you know, say they make it to the middle of the rankings based off of how they do in Gfinity and ESL, and maybe they play other matches against some of these teams, then they're going to stand a very good chance of making it either automatically into the qualifier, or, you know, at least they can play through the open bracket. But the same qualifying steps will occur every season. So there's no way for a team to just artificially get bumped into the Pro League, but they're going to have the chance to at least qualify even if they start making their way up through the ranks. When is the next season? Sometime after the first season ends. I don't know exactly when. That's not my... that's not something that's really been decided quite yet. And I think a lot of that'll have to do with the financial side. You know, if we can swing doing a second season, how well the first season's received. You know, we're only a few weeks into the first RLC Pro League season, so, you know, we'll be coming back to that when we get a little closer to that time frame. But as it stands right now, it is just a, you know, regular season still hasn't been finalized in terms of what the schedule is going to look like, or at least announced yet. It may have been finalized internally, but, you know. But yeah, that's how it's going to work for teams who have not qualified for Pro League. They'll have another chance when the next season starts. But once a season's been set, those teams are locked in, mainly because the only time there can be a change would be if a team were to disband or just stop playing. And at that point, it would really be up to whoever runs Pro League to make that call as far as if we invite a team in to take their place, or what the case would be. You know, that's the only time that could happen. And based off the fact that we have seen so many teams disband over the last few weeks, I guess it's not entirely impossible for that to happen. But hopefully the top 7 teams that are on this list, which are the teams that made it into Pro League, will stay intact or at least exist throughout the season. But we'll see. Alright, again, the Pro League will begin in 2 weeks' time. So not this weekend, but next weekend. What's Noble's problem? I don't know. Just wins that they should be getting aren't happening. Too many losses. I don't know. They got a little bit of regrouping to do for sure. Oh, when is the EU Pro Draft? I don't know. Hopefully soon. I'll have to talk to Cloud and figure out when we want to do that. But yeah, hopefully we can do that pretty soon. The EU Draft. Yeah, the EU Pro Draft tournament really should hopefully happen. I don't know what the policy is for if a Pro League team disbands. That's going to require a little bit of conversation should that happen in the middle of the season. I know it's something we have talked a little bit about internally, but I don't know what the official policy is going to be on that yet. I can't give you my zero a position on this power ranking when they don't exist anymore. Linkaroo. Do you think we've reached the limit of how good a Rocket League team can get? No. I don't know. I don't think so. I think there's still a skill ceiling to reach. There's still little things that teams can figure out and do better than other teams, and I think the thing I really want to see now is less of teams getting better in terms of the very top, and more of the rest of the field catching up to those teams, so that the fight for number one isn't always a given, you know? That's what I really want to see. Who's on my XMG? That is a lot, Sniper Kid, and Turbo Pulsa. So once again, that is a lot, Sniper Kid, and Turbo Pulsa. Those are the 3 members of my XMG. Formerly known as Kapow, but now known as my XMG. So. Yeah, it's a very young game. You know, I mean, it does have a lot of similarities to things like super powered, you know, the SARP PC. So that's why those players tend to have the advantage in a lot of these competitive things. But a lot's going to change over the next few months, I'm sure. How many sales have there been for the Gird Your Loins shirt? I think I'm at 3 still. I don't think I've sold anything new lately. But I'm working on it. Let's see. All right, any other questions? Now is your time, of course. If you have any questions about the rankings or even just about the scene in general, the competitive scene, or whatever's good. 3 is a good start, but I want to try to sell around 50 till the end of before the end of the year. Well, here, this is if you're interested, that is where it's at. Just go to shop.shalthis.com. That is where the shirt is at. And as it stands right now, to explain that, it'll be available there through Teespring until the end of the year. And then whatever is sold will be printed off and shipped and everything like that. The more that gets sold, the better it'll be. But in general, they will all be... The minimum's been reached. So whatever has been sold now, whatever you buy now, will be printed and shipped. It'll all be good. So, with that, if you're interested, you know, that's where you can go to get it. If there is a lot of interest in that shirt, the sales may continue on a different site after the end of the year, but it all depends on how this campaign goes. So. Remember, you don't have to privately message me with your questions. You can just post them up in the chat. That's fine. Alright, let's see here. If you take a weak player and put them in F3, will they win and be in #1 team in EU? I don't know if I understand that question. If you mean like if I just replaced one of the members of Flipside Tactics and they still won, would they be #1? I mean, yeah. You know. I mean, here's really the rule that we follow when it comes to these rankings. We look at the subs that teams use very carefully. If a team uses a sub in any way, we have to change how we look at that team at least a little bit. But, hypothetically, if Comrade Gaming ends up playing a tournament and they sub out one of their players for Marky Duda or Mike Rules, for example, we consider that a ringer. And those wins don't carry the same weight as they would if they were using their normal roster. But if a team like MyXMG replaces one of their players with somebody who either is comparable or not as known and still does well, then those wins will count for around the same, if not exactly the same. There's really no situation in which a win can be worth more, necessarily. It depends. Like, there was that time a few months back where Swarm played a 2v3 for most of the tournament, and did exceptionally well. A team that loses to a two-man team would probably take a bigger hit on the power rankings than if they lost to that team in 3v3, for obvious reasons. But, you know, it's all case by case. We'd have to really look at it. Alright, let's see. I mean, as far as camera goes for spectating or for shoutcasting, it'll vary. I'll use player view when I feel like it's necessary, but I'll use the free cam when I feel like I get a better perspective of the action. I mix it up. I don't just stick to player view because it's hard to keep track of the action on the field when it's just player view, but mixing it up makes it a little easier to digest. Alright, I think... Did I catch up with all the... Yeah, I don't know what to say about stuff being out of sync. I don't know if that's just my webcam or what, but... It's what it is. Well, see, here's the thing. I see there's still a lot of talk about the skill ceiling. I don't even think the top players in the world have necessarily hit their skill ceiling. They just haven't been challenged in any different way to do anything any different. You know, players like Kronovi and Cooksier and Mike and Marky and all these, you know, really high-level and well-skilled players, they don't need to change up what they do because it works. And they've basically... You know, they've got a style that fits their play. But if a player were to come up who does things a little differently and has taken advantage of certain elements of play and really pushes that limit, then yeah, we're going to see some change in how they play. At least if they want to stay competitive. So. You know, I think that's really the case. There's no... The only ceiling we've seen on skill thus far is just because it's kind of artificial. It's really just because nobody's been challenged yet. At least to that point, I should say. So even if you take players that you might consider to be the very best in the world, I still think they have room to improve technically. But there's no reason for them to do any kind of significant improvement because they're already dominating the power rankings or dominating their playstyle. So I think when that happens, then we'll see some fun. But for now, I mean, here's the idea. Like, just because Rocket League is only a few months old doesn't necessarily mean that it's that dramatically different than Battle Cars, to the point where, I mean, that's why these old players are dominating the performance so much. You know, it's because they have years of experience in Battle Cars that carried over nicely into Rocket League, but that there's still room to work with. So. They do have individual styles, but I still think that there's additional skills left to learn. And, you know, figure out from there. I mean, give it a little more time, and this Rocket League is going to fall into the same kind of pattern that something like a proper sport does, like basketball or football or baseball. You know, everybody knows what a good player does in those respective sports, and there's no real skill ceiling. It's just a matter of, are you perfect or not? You know, that's what it's going to come down to. How is SL Express doing nowadays? I have not talked to him in a very, very long time. I hope he's doing well. I know he's just kind of dealing with his own stuff. But yeah, I haven't talked to him in a really, really long time. So, hopefully life is good. Yeah, Supersonic Avengers has been doing exceptionally well. They're up 2 spots this week. And I expect them to keep climbing through the Pro League. Alright. Just looking to see if there's any questions. What do I think about my XMG? I think they are an outstanding team, and I'm glad to see them back in the top 3. That they've made it again that far. You know, I think as far as my XMG goes, they are really just a very solid team that have been getting a lot of big wins lately. They've never dropped too far. They've just been kind of playing catch up with some of the teams around them. But I could expect them to do exceptionally well here and possibly encroach on those top 2 spots in the near future. Alright, any other questions? Why did Crown and Jewels drop a spot? Mainly because of my XMG's performance. Really. I think that was the biggest reason. My XMG got a few bigger wins than Crown and Jewels, and just did better overall this week. So it ended up nudging them out. There's not a huge distinction between those 2 spots, but it was just enough to kind of give them that edge. Yeah, the Go For It Cup is still going to keep going. That's going to happen this weekend because it's 2 days after the Christmas, so any team who's there can play. If they're not, they don't have to. How long are we away from LAN events? Exactly, I don't know. But I do expect to see the first LAN event come next year. So. Because next year we're going to find out who is working with Psyonix and what kind of proper competitive scene there is. So, hopefully, sooner rather than later. But, yeah, I expect we'll see our first LAN event next year. Hopefully early-ish next year. First half of the year. But we'll see. Who's my favorite player to watch? Depends on the mood I'm in. If I'm looking for a stream that's going to be fairly informative and give me a lot of insight as to what players are doing and why decisions are being made, I'll probably watch Kronovi. He's pretty good at that. If I'm just looking to have some fun and goof around with somebody who is incredibly talented but likes to have a fun stream, then I'll tune into Mike Rules. So, all depends. I like streams that have interaction, though. I don't necessarily tune into streams that have nothing going on in terms of actual interaction with the audience. But yeah, that's about it. Do I think there's a team with a lack of individual skills but incredible teamwork and tactics? Most of the teams that climb up this list don't necessarily have the... Like, they're not all necessarily the best individually, but they work really well as a unit. One of the biggest exceptions, of course, is Flipside Tactics, who every member of that team is individually incredibly talented. But yeah, we're starting to see the team game happen a little bit more and more. Teams like Noble, for example, are really good at the team game. Supersonic Avengers, really good at the team game. You know, it's not a big distinction yet. There's still the individual skill that I think is setting the tone quite a bit. But we're starting to get that more and more with teams that are more focused on the team dynamic than the individual skill dynamic, which is important. How will the Xbox One version affect the Pro circuit? It won't at all, really, because the Xbox One version doesn't play with the other versions. So, Xbox One is going to be isolated in its own little universe, unless it's given the ability to interact with PS4 and PC players. So for now, the Pro scene is basically going to be PC, which it currently is. I think there's a few PS4 players, but it's mostly just PC. I bet I find the right porn video very efficiently. Well, I haven't been tested on that. Maybe a porn power rankings in the never future. Do we think we'll see Asian esport teams taking over the current top teams? I don't know. I haven't seen a lot from those teams lately, or at all, since those servers opened up. It's entirely possible. You know, you get a lot of those teams involved in other esports, so I certainly could expect to see it here, especially once the esports scene really solidifies and gets bigger. But, yeah, I don't know for sure if we'll really see them. Yes, I will be doing NA Power Rankings. The NA Power Rankings show will begin January 1st, so that Friday, and it will be every Friday. So, January 1st, NA Power Rankings show will take place. So, don't miss that. That'll be fun. Anyway, why is Spectral above Noble? A few reasons. They had some good wins this week. Like, if I go back and just look at... Hold on. Like, if we go back and just look at, like, overall wins. Let's see. Spectral ended up getting 2 wins over Gold Rush and also In Extremis RL and Orcs RL. And they also beat SK Gaming. Whereas Noble got 2 back-to-back losses to Supersonic Avengers, but they also beat Gold Rush twice. So, a little bit of a repeat there. Comrade, Shift Play, and Orcs. So, very similar performances out of both of them. I think just the SK win was enough to give them a little bit of an edge there. But it's really close. It could go either way with those two teams. So, but yeah, there you go. So anyway, yeah, I just wanted to show that to you. Hope you don't mind. I just wanted to, you know, show it to somebody before I start breaking into it. But maybe I'll get sponsored now, and I can do a Poke Candy unboxing video every month. We'll see. There you go. So there's your power rankings, there's your stuff, there's your scene. One more call. Let's do it. One final call for questions. Again, anything related to the power rankings, to the European scene, or just to whatever you want. My XMG is a lot, Sniper Kid, and Turbo Pulsa. That is who is on that team. The liner of this hat keeps coming up. Anyway. I don't see many other questions. So I may have to wrap this stream up for this week. Alright, well, I think we're good. So we covered our top 10 this week. One final time before we wrap things up here. There will not be a power ranking or a power ranking show for either region next week. Due to the holiday season, we're going to take the week off, and we'll come back the week after. Speaking of the week after, on January 1st, there will be the debut of the NA Power Ranking Show. So for all the NA Power Rankings, I will be bringing you that show starting on the 1st of the month, so don't miss that. But with that being said, I think we are good. Did somebody have a question? I thought I saw something coming in. Oh, predictions for Pro League. I don't know. I mean, I'm inclined to tilt towards the top teams already that have been doing so well. I mean, Flipside and SK I expect to do well. I am kind of leaning towards Supersonic Avengers doing well in this as well. Also my XMG. So I could see those being the 4 teams that make it through. But I don't know. Oh, it's a lot of case-by-case sort of stuff, for sure. Does my in-game knowledge help with shoutcasting? Maybe a little bit. My knowledge of how players play and how the scene looks and what you need to do in a game helps more. Whether I'm able to do it or not is irrelevant. I just continue to play so I can get better, period. It really has nothing to do with my shoutcasting. It's really just for fun. Well, I mean, it'll be fun to see how it plays out, for sure. And which teams get it together, which teams don't. But I think we've done our due diligence to avoid any Air Force 2 type situations in the Pro League where teams start to get a lot of big losses and don't manage to get any wins. You know, I think we did a pretty good job of requiring teams to earn their place in these rankings. So, well, anyway, I think we're good. I'm going to wrap things up now. I'll be back in a couple weeks' time for another Power Ranking show, and I'll, of course, be doing more streaming regularly. I don't know when I'm going to be streaming next, just because of the holiday coming up and everything like that. Might be a few days. Or I might do it really late tonight. I haven't decided yet. So, in any event, there you go. There's your Power Rankings. I'm going to wrap things up today. I will be back again very soon. Again, starting January 1st, NA Power Rankings show will begin, but no Power Rankings next week. So, there you have it. That's going to do it. Thank you all for watching. I will see you again next time. So cheers. Have a great rest of your day and a great holiday season. Take care, everybody.
Whenever